Alright, so we are now up to question 7a of exercise 14h, which is asking us to solve the following equation for theta is equivalent to 0 to 2 pi. The first question before us is sine of 2 theta equals negative a half. Now, we don't like this 2 theta in there. The reason why we don't like it is because it's going to affect our period and therefore affect how we use the unit circle. So the very first thing that we want to do is we want to say, all right, let x equal 2 theta. And by doing that, we can now rewrite this as sine of x equals negative a half. And now, because we don't have a coefficient in front of our x, our period isn't going to change. It's going to remain as 2 pi, which means we can use our unit circle as per usual. But now that we have x in here, we have to do something about our domain, because our domain at the moment is in terms of theta. So let's stop and think about how we can change our domain into an x, it being x equivalent to something. The very first thing I'm going to realize is that if theta is equivalent to 0 to 2 pi, that means that 2 theta is going to be double. So 0 times 2 is 0, and 2 times 2 pi will be 4 pi. So hopefully you can see that by doubling theta, I'm going to double my period. Now we know what 2 theta is equal to. We know that 2 theta is equal to x. We've defined that here. So that means we could down here say, well, our domain will be x is equivalent to 0 to 4 pi. Perfect. And all of this is really background information, and we can now work from this and really treat it as a normal problem now. So we now come and look at our unit circle, and we say, all right, we have our unit circle and we know that we're dealing with sine. That means we'll be looking at our y-axis. And we're looking, where on my y-axis am I going to get negative a half? And we know that negative a half is going to exist somewhere around here. I then could do out little dots so I can figure out where that's going to lie on my unit circle. So I'm going to have a spot here. And then I'm also going to have a spot here as well. Next thing is I would write out my coordinates of each one, because that's going to help me remember what my angle will be. So I know that my y value is a negative a half, which means that my x value here will be the square root of 3 on 2, and it's going to be negative. Then over here, I'm going to have positive the square root of 3 on 2, and minus a half. Now my coordinate consists of both an x and a y, but remember, because we're dealing with sine, we only really care about our y value, which in both cases here is negative a half. And that's because right here, that's negative a half. Perfect. So the next thing now is I'm going to draw in my lines, which is going to help me figure out what my values will be, my angles will be. So I have a line there, and I have a line here. Okay, so now I need to figure out what my angles will be. So what will here to here be? And here is really just a matter of memorizing your unit circle. So we should all know that what the my value of this will be 7 pi on 6. 7 pi on 6. And then my value of here all the way around here will be 11 pi on 6. 11 pi on 6. So now I'm going to come over here and start writing down all my values. So I'm going to say x is equal to 7 pi on 6. 11 pi on 6. Let's remember that I have now gone 2 pi around my unit circle. Whoops, doesn't want to work for me. I've gone 2 pi around my unit circle. But if we look at my domain, it's from 0 to 4 pi, which means I need to go another rotation around. So that's going to mean, let me get rid of these angles. What I'm going to have to do is go around once, 2 pi, then go around again to find what this is. So it's going to be 2 pi plus 7 pi on 6. So a way we could think about it is I have 2 pi here, sorry, I have 7 pi on 6 here, and what I'm doing is I'm plussing 2 pi to it. I'm plussing 2 pi to it. And you could come down here and do some quick working out. 7 pi on 6 plus 2 pi. I need to make sure my denominators are the same. I'm going to have to times my numerator by 2 to make it 12. Then I'm going to plus them together. 12 plus 7 is going to be 19 pi on 6, which means up here I'm going to get 19 pi on 6. I then am going to do the same thing for my next value. I'm going to plus it by 2 pi. So on my unit circle, that would mean that I'm now going to here. So I'll come over here, do some working out. So I'm going to get 11 pi on 6. Instead of writing 2 pi, I'm just going to write 12 pi on 6 because that's the same. No point doing the same work twice. And that's going to mean I have 23 pi on 6. So I come over here and I'm going to write 23 pi on 6. And that's because I've done 2 rotations around my unit circle. Let me now delete all this working. Oh, my computer doesn't want to work with me. Delete. There we go. Then I'm also going to get rid of this just to make it a bit cleaner. All right. Now, I have my x values, which is great and all, but at the end of the day, I still want to keep it in theta because that's what the question is asking us in. So I don't want it in x, I want it in theta, which is going to mean I'm going to have to change my x to theta. How am I going to do that? Well, let me copy this for a second. Let me copy this. So the perks of doing it on the computer. And I know that my x equals 2 theta. So I could come down here, I could get rid of my x and say, you know what? X is 2 theta. These two things are the same. So now if I wanted to get it in terms of theta, what I have to do is divide this side by 2. Now another way you can think about it, which is a bit easier, is when I say that I'm dividing this side by 2, what I'm really doing is I'm timesing it by 1/2. So if I'm timesing this side by 1/2, that means I need to times everything else by 1/2. I need to times this 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 by 1/2. And by doing this, what I'm going to do is cancel out that 2, and I'm going to be left with just theta on this side. So 7 pi over 6 times 1/2, well, I'm going to go 2 times 6 is 12. So I'm going to get 7 pi over 12. Next, I'm going to go 11 pi over 6 times 1/2. So I'm going to get 2 times 6 is 12. So I'm going to get 11 pi over 12. And hopefully what you're seeing is I'm just timesing all my denominators by 2. So this is going to be 19 pi on 12. And lastly, I'm going to get 23 pi on 12. And now I have my answers in terms of theta, just like I wanted. So this down here will be my final answer. So as you can see, these questions, they're not tricky as much as they are long. They are long questions. And as you can see, I have 4 answers. Hopefully this made sense and is helpful when you're doing your homework.